The Remedial Herstory Project is a nonprofit working to get women's history into the primary and secondary history curriculum. To help us meet our goal, we produce media, lesson plans, and so much more. You can check it out on our website, www.remedialherstory.com. Our project is funded through grants and by patrons, potentially like you.
Thank you to our patrons Jeff, Barbara, Christian, Kent, Jamie, Jenna, Nancy, Megan, Leah, Mark, Nicole, Anne, Sarah, Alicia, Katya, Michelle, Jessica, Laura, and Jackie.
If you would like to join these wonderful people and become a patron, you can head over to patreon.com and become a supporter of the Remedial Herstory Project. You too can help us reform education and allow women to be seen, heard, and complicated.
Hey, Kelsie.
Hey, Brooke.
Want to tell everyone what's happening in today's episode?
Today, we are going to be talking about the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948.
That's a mouthful. Let's get into this.
A mouthful.
Hello, and welcome to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%, the podcast that explores what happened to the women in history class. Now, here's your host, Kelsie Brooke Eckert, and her partner in crime, Brooke Neva Sullivan.
In this episode, we are going to be asking the question, why woman power in the Women's Armed Services Integration Act of 1948?
What's the acronym on that one? Jeez.
WSIA.
Never mind. Go back.
WSIA. And today we have Tanya Roth joining us.
Ooh, Tanya Roth.
Woot woot. She is a high school teacher. Shout out to the high school teachers.
Secondary.
Yes. And she's a rock star. She lives in St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis, which happens to be where I went to college. And so we bonded for a long time.
Did you say Missouri? Or
no, I'm
Missouri.
Not from Missouri. I went to college there. I have the proper accent.
Oh, excuse me.
Sorry, Missouri.
I have some colleagues that live there, and so I always like to try out different ways to say their state. I'm sure they're really thrilled when I do that.
I'm sure they love that.
I mean, it's like really bonding. Missouri.
Missouri.
They're like, get away from me.
I don't think that's right, though. Either.
It's definitely not.
Okay, great.
It's like how I say Louisville. They're like, no.
No. But anyway, she is a military historian and just such a rock star. This is a really important act, even though it's a mouthful and probably should have an acronym.
Yeah, what's it all about?
1948. This is post-World War II. And my perception of women in the military post-World War II is that they stopped being in the military and they went home to be housewives. You know, like that's
if there was homes to be had. So many women were now single.
That's true, but lots of men were coming home from war, and if this is the baby boom, I mean, hello.
Oh, true.
There was baby making going on.
Oh, yeah, the boomers.
The boomers.
This is when they boom.
So, that's my perception of it, but she has enlightened me, and I'm so excited to share this with everybody, that this act allowed more women to stay in the military, and they are part of the early Cold War, and then obviously stay on and continue through, and are still in the military today.
Women are still in the military?
I know, this is really shocking information to everybody.
Thank God.
Yeah. And so it's really cool. It's a really cool history. And these women are some of the first to call for equal pay, for equal work.
Very cool.
So I'm just so excited to have her here with us today. And why don't we start by having her introduce herself?
Hi, my name is Tanya Roth. I am a history teacher at a private school in St. Louis, Missouri. I earned my PhD in history at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I became a teacher. I love teaching because it's so much fun to get to talk about the past with my students and think about it in new ways. And it's just been a lot of fun for me. In my spare time, I enjoy watching Doctor Who and reading lots of books and spending time with my son and my husband. I became interested in the topic of women in the military when I was an undergraduate. I took a history course on women in World War I. I'd never thought about the history of women. I'd never really thought much about World War I, but it sounded interesting. And one of the books we read that year was Testament of Youth, which is written by a woman named Vera Brittain. Vera Brittain was in World War I. She was not really a nurse as we would think of them, because nurses today are very professionally trained, and usually have college degrees. But in World War I, a lot of young women from upper class and middle upper class backgrounds in England became members of the Voluntary Aid Detachment, or VADs. They had very little training. They went off to the war, and they began stitching men's bodies back together. And this really captivated me. I had never thought about women in war, and it just opened the door to me to think about the world a little differently. A few years later, I decided to go to graduate school, and I knew that I wanted to study women in the military. And in the time since my undergraduate, I thought a lot or seen a lot about women in World War II, and it seemed like that was something that people knew about. But I wondered what happened after World War II. I could see that as I was growing up and in the early 2000s, women in the military were becoming much more visible, but nobody seemed to talk about what happened after World War II. So I started looking into this, and I found that in 1948, right after the end of World War II, the United States military decided they could offer women a permanent place in national defense, and they offered them equal pay. There was no women's movement at the time. There was no national push for equality like that. But in the military, women could have careers that would give them equal pay and benefits. I thought this was really intriguing, and I wanted to know more, and this is what got me started on my research. So let me give you a little context about where this story fits. The big question I wanted to think about today is why woman power? After World War II, why is the military interested in adding women to the armed forces? So if we think about it this way, World War II has just ended. The war is over in 1945, that September, with the surrender of Japan. And after that, the United States military really begins to start bringing home its men and its women, although there are more women serving in the United States than abroad. And they're starting to figure out what do they do for the future. For most Americans, this is a time of joy and also a time of pain because so many men and some women died during the war. So many Americans' loved ones are coming home. They're going back to work. They're trying to take up life as they knew it. The big message that's being sent for women in this time is they should go back home and be good wives and mothers. So Rosie the Riveter, who had picked up factory jobs during World War II and helped out at the home front, she was told to give up her job to the men who were coming back because they needed those jobs after their time at war. But in the military, it starts to look a little different. The Cold War is just beginning. The U.S. is going to have occupations after the war in Europe and in Asia. Tensions are brewing with the Soviets, and both the president and members of Congress are really thinking about this. Before World War II, the United States had a military, but it wasn't a very large one. So as they think ahead to what if another Pearl Harbor happens, how do we ensure that we're really prepared to tackle whatever comes next? They start thinking about all their options, and there's a lot of things going on. They want to bring servicemen home. They want to end the draft, which is still going on even at the end of 1945. And they just have a lot of questions about the future. So let me give you a deep dive into this history. During World War II, almost 400,000 women served in a number of roles across American society and the military. In the military, there were several places where women served. The Army had the Women's Army Corps. The Navy had the WAVES, the Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. The Coast Guard had the SPARS, Semper Paratus Always Ready. That was what they called women in the Coast Guard based on their nickname. Now, the Coast Guard is not always a part of the military. It's only part of the military in wartime. So World War II is certainly a big force. There are also all the women serving as nurses. The United States had the Army Nurse Corps and the Navy Nurse Corps dating back to the turn of the 20th century. So women are really everywhere. There are women who go abroad. They serve in North Africa. They serve in Europe. There are nurses sent into the South Pacific. Most women do serve in the United States, though, particularly if you are African American women. African American women serve in segregated ranks during World War II, and most of them are serving inside the United States. The exception is the 6888, which is an all-Black women's contingent that goes to Europe to manage postal service there. and they do some really important work there. But for all of these women, the idea was always, from the beginning, that women's service in the military was temporary. It was just for the duration of the war, plus 6 months. They figure it'll take some time to then wind down the women's services after the war. It's not something that they see as permanent. And it took a lot during the war to convince Americans that, yes, the military could use women, and women did need to be there. It was a tough call. There were a lot of people who said, wait a second, this does not make sense. We don't need women in uniform. Women don't fight. Women can't carry guns. But a lot of people said, no, it's total war. We need to have women helping out in whatever way we can. So the question facing the U.S. government after the war, as they're thinking about the years ahead, now that we've lived through the experience of preparing for total war, how do we make sure we're not caught off guard next time? On top of that, how do we make sure we can get these servicemen home to their families? They have served for years for their country. They deserve to come home and be recognized for their patriotism and not have to continue serving. Certainly, there are some men who want to continue in military careers, but most men had been drafted during the war and they were ready to come home. So as military leaders are bringing home servicemen from around the world, members of Congress start looking at the future of the military. Or the big issue that they're thinking about is preparedness. And the military is changing. So during the course of 1946, things move a little slowly. But in 1947, we start to see some real changes. That September, we get the creation of the Department of Defense, which will be one overarching umbrella organization that will help manage all of the military services. Before then, there'd been the Department of the Army, the Department of the Navy, but now the Department of Defense is going to really modernize the American military for the future. The Air Force is created. The Army Navy Nurse Corps get permanent status after the war through their own legislation, because by that point, of course, everybody assumes you need nurses. They also assume that nurses are women. They're not really envisioning a place for men in those units yet. But what about service women? That's the other question. And there were a lot of people who really just assumed that, nope, war's over, we don't need service women anymore. But there were a few people who think differently. One person in particular you've probably heard of, General Dwight Eisenhower. General Eisenhower, when he had been a commander in World War II, he called himself a converted skeptic. He did not believe at first that women could ever play a role in the military, but he later said to members of Congress that, yeah, actually, I saw that women did such good work, we can't possibly live without them. There were also women who led this effort, including Colonel Mary Halloran of the Women's Army Corps. She'd served during World War II and by 1947 had become director of the Women's Army Corps. So these two individuals, I'd say, are really responsible for leading so much of the effort to ensure that woman power becomes something permanent. But it's not an easy road to go through. It starts pretty quickly. When Eisenhower takes over as the Chief of Staff of the Army, he immediately tells his staff, we have to have legislation to make service women's status permanent. This starts pretty early, actually in 1946. They put together a bill, but it doesn't really go anywhere. In 1947, things are looking pretty good, though. In the summer of 1947, the Senate Armed Services Committee goes through the legislation, and they agree to move forward. They think there's something important here. They send it to the full Senate passes it, and the legislation goes to the House. And that's where things start to stall out. So in the summer of 1947, the House Armed Services Committee says, yeah, we're not going to talk about this right now. Let's table it until January. And in some ways, that was okay, because that September, the legislation to create the Department of Defense passed, and that was an important shift that was going to change the military. So having the delay, on the one hand, was not a big deal. What was a big deal, though, is that January 1948 would be about 2.5 years after the war's end. And if you remember, the idea was that the women's services were for the duration of the war plus 6 months. There's an interesting trick of the pen, though, that Truman's able to do. Although most Americans think of the end of the war as September 1945, for administrative purposes, President Truman kept extending the length of the war, so to speak. The war was over, but for the purposes of drawing down men, bringing home equipment, and all those things, Truman did not declare the end of formal hostilities of World War II until December 31st, 1946. So when things get postponed in 1947, that looks like a bad problem. And then at the end of July 1947, Congress says, let's continue some wartime measures. And they allow the Women's Army Corps, the Women's Navy components, and the Women Marines to continue till July 1st, 1948. So there's some time. But January 1948 for the next round of hearings kind of makes things a little tough. So let's fast forward to January of 1948. It really begins happening in February of 1948. Mary Halloran takes the stand, and what she stresses to members of Congress is that they shouldn't see the question of woman power as a big feminist movement. In fact, she says to them, the War Department's decision to ask Congress for a permanent Women's Army Corps was not the result of snap judgment. It was the conclusion of 25 years progressive thinking. She also told her own staff directors, we're not a bunch of feminists looking for a job in the Army. Instead, she's very consciously thinking of this as women are here to do patriotic work. Yes, there will be benefits for them, but she sees this as practical. A civilian woman, Mary Pillsbury Lord, who had chaired the Women's Army Corps National Civilian Advisory Committee during World War II, she also testified. And she's a civilian woman, so she doesn't have a stake herself in the women's military service, but she has spent the war thinking about women's roles and what they're going to do. And she'd seen the importance of women's military service. So she argued that putting women into the military permanently would be beneficial for both women and the nation as a whole. She thought that military service, as it did for men, would make women better citizens. She thought that serving in the military gave Americans a number of really great characteristics, and that military service would teach women tolerance, respect for the nation, that they would become aware of the benefits of democracy, they'd understand better how the government worked, and they would also become better at self-improvement. In other words, they become better citizens, which she then translated to becoming better wives and mothers later on. Eisenhower himself comes back to the stand. He is no longer in the military by February of 1948, but he points out, look, the draft is ending. We need personnel, and we got to be practical about this. This is not, again, about equal rights or feminism. It's about trying to do what the country needs in a time of difficulty. He believed that women were very efficient at their work. He thought they could do things much better than men in some positions. And he points out, look, we have occupying forces all around the world. We need people. You have to get them from somewhere. You're either going to have to draft them or you're going to have to recruit them. And women have proven that they are happy to stand up and do that work. Members of Congress pointed out, okay, but Americans are concerned about having their daughters in uniform. So one of the things that they think about is, should we allow women to have regular status or should we make them reserves? The military reserves always exist as a way to provide backup support in time of need. So a member of the reserves is not going to actively be in the military, but can be called up when they're needed. And this is a big question that comes up. But the Secretary of Defense and General Eisenhower say, no, that's not enough. You can't just make women a backup to the real military. You have to go the whole way and give them equal status. Secretary of Defense Forrestal said that they had to have some foundational similarities between men and women's services in order for things to work. And he said, no business, no governmental organization, and especially no military force can accomplish its objectives where individuals working side by side, doing identical work with equal degrees of responsibility, are classified differently as to status, prerogatives, or other benefits. He says, if we're going to win the next war, we need trained skeleton staffs. So he's not imagining that there will be millions of women in the military, but he is imagining that they can have a small, select group of women who can then be ready to go. And then in time of war, you can expand upon that. And he says, if we're going to use women in the armed forces, we should go the whole way and give them identical status and benefits as men.
Hey, Kelsie, I don't think our listeners know about the new upcoming project that we're working on.
Which one?
the video series.
Oh, the video series. That's awesome.
I know. So I thought we could tell them a little bit about what the project is, how it's funded, and what the purpose is.
Well, we are producing a video series, 25 episodes on U.S. history, 25 episodes on world history. And the point of these is to provide teachers who don't know women's history with like a 10-minute video that they could play for their class. So say you're teaching a lesson on the American Revolution. Here's 10 minutes about women in that time period.
Amazing.
And it could be a foundation that you can springboard from and do something really cool on those women.
And these videos are, yes, you, but they are fully scripted. You can look at the scripts. They're nicely edited with some really great content.
Yep. They're vetted by historians, 2 PhDs, at least in history. So, you know, people smarter than me.
But they're going to be free, and they're on YouTube.
And they'll be on YouTube. They also have a comedian from Hollywood who is helping to make them funny. So it's, you know, because I'm like kind of boring.
No, very funny. But that's awesome. So they're really engaging and they're really cool content. So more to come there. So we have those coming out. And those are funded through grants? Through our patrons.
Okay. So their, you know, contributions to us through Patreon are supporting that project. And then we also have a lot of people that have been donating through Instagram, Facebook. We have a Venmo account. You can find us there.
That's awesome.
And they're making those contributions. So yeah, it's an amazing thing. And if this is something that you're like, yes, that's what teachers need, every penny helps because it is a really expensive project. So.
Yeah, totally. And we had a match donor for a while there too, which is really cool. So definitely if you're interested in those, feel free to donate. You can donate right on our website, Instagram, and Venmo.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Great work. I'm excited to see the rest of those videos.
Oh, Brooke, thanks for your support of the project.
Awesome.
Now, he, of course, is not imagining that women will have every role in the military. He and Eisenhower are very convinced that there are roles women did as well or better than men, but certainly not combat. They're thinking about women in administrative roles, women doing a lot of paperwork, women doing things that are really not dependent on carrying a gun. Nobody is really thinking about that in 1948. General Omar Bradley also argued that women needed the same benefits as men and says, look, only a very small number of men who enter the military ever fire a gun. Obviously, World War II might have been an exception to that, but in general, the modern military, there's way more than just a battlefield. One of the other arguments they make against just giving women reserve status is that it would not attract women as a career. And they are definitely seeing women's service as a career, which is something new. They figure that in peacetime, it would be hard to recruit women if they were not actually getting the same benefits as men. And they would also see themselves as a backup. So by March of 1948, the members of Congress do decide to allow women into the military just as reserves. They revise the bill and they send it on with just that. It's not something that goes over very well. Most members of the House end up voting for it, but one person is a holdout, and that's Margaret Chase Smith, a Republican representative from Maine. She'd been an active advocate of women's military service since before the war started, and she told members of Congress that she would always support the legislation for women's integration if they went for full status. She thought the reserve only was unfair and a contradiction in terms. And the New York Times in March 31st pointed out nobody's offered a credible reason why they've decided to just give women reserve status. They point out that during the war, women had done everything that had been asked of them. So either they needed to give them the same status as men, or to dispense with their services, they said, would be a sorry blunder. Women had proven that they had served the country in any way they'd been asked. It seemed unfair at this point to restrict them from anything else. By April 1948, there are many, many groups who are supporting women's services. And what happens is that in 1948, things get a little hairy outside of Congress. The world starts to heat up. So, for example, a communist government takes over in Czechoslovakia that February. By March, the Soviets are starting to control the traffic into Berlin. The first Arab-Israeli War began on May 15th when Israel declared independence. And the Marshall Plan went into effect that April in the first incarnation of the Truman Doctrine. So while all this is going on, members of Congress are also talking about whether they should reinstate the draft and should they have universal military training. So woman power becomes more important than ever. What ends up happening is it becomes hypocritical for them to see this as something just for reserve status, and they reverse themselves. In a joint discussion with the Senate, they revised the bill back to full status for women, and on July 12, 1948, the Women's Armed Services Integration Act becomes law. It's all about military need, but what's really striking about the Women's Armed Services Integration Act is that it also provides a level of equality for women. By insisting that women needed to have military status on the same basis as men, meaning regular and reserve status, they set a foundation and some precedents that have long-term consequences. So, for example, they allow women equal pay. They're going to use the same rank system. During World War II, at first, the women's services had been auxiliaries alongside the military rather than in it, and that had created a lot of problems. So the underlying decision after World War II is that they would use the same pay and rank scale. So a woman coming in as a private will make exactly the same as a man coming in as a private. There's no difference. Their gender does not matter. There are some limitations to that idea of equality, however. For example, women are classified as non-combatants. They will not fight. That is, period, end of story. Combat is something that's defined for men only. But they will also ensure that women will not command men. They will limit women to being 2% of the total armed forces, and although they will get equal pay and equal rank, there are limitations to that. This is a time when nobody can ever imagine that they would ever need a female general, so they set up limits on how high women can go in the ranks. So, for example, lieutenant colonel or commander would be the highest ranking permanent levels that a woman can serve in the military, and the highest officers at that level were those who were running the women's services up through the 1960s. So there's really defined limits on how far they can go. The highest rank would be colonel or captain. That's just below general or admiral, and that's pretty high up. It's something that takes a long time to get to. And in 1948, they think this is okay. It won't be a problem. And they're kind of true. They don't even have women who can approach that level in large numbers until the 1960s, and that will become another question. But the highest ranks are reserved for the director of the Women's Army Corps, the director of Women in the Air Force, the director of the Women Marines, and the director of the Waves. Although Waves is the term used only in World War II for women in the Navy, the title for that individual in the Navy would be the Assistant Chief of Naval Personnel for Women. They had that highest rank only when they served in that role. When they retired, they'd have to step back a rank for permanent purposes, for pay and benefits. They do set up separate male and female officer promotion lists, so men will not compete with women for promotion and vice versa. That was designed so that women would not be disadvantaged alongside men. Because, for example, Colonel Halloran said they needed to protect women because servicewomen without having access to combat would never be able to compete in the same way as men. Another underlying provision that they keep in there is that if you're under the age of 21, your parents have to give you permission to join the military, something that was not required for men. Men could enlist at the age of 18 or 17 with parental permission. Women just had to be 18 with parental permission or 21. They also said that male spouses of servicewomen could not receive benefits that would normally be given to a military spouse. That mostly includes housing and similar benefits. But they also don't expect that that's something that's going to happen, because this is a time when men are the heads of households and wives and children are generally the dependents. What they're envisioning is that military service will be something that women will pursue as a short-term career until they marry and have children, because they're also pretty convinced that women who are mothers should not be serving as well. Women can marry. If they are already married, they cannot join the military unless they had served during World War II. But as the moment they become pregnant, there will be no military service for them. So what happens with the Women's Armed Services Integration Act is it expands access to military service for women in a way that's really remarkable for its time. There are a lot of limits, and those limitations are going to have really big implications for how women's service develops in the years ahead. But by creating a space that offered equal pay and equal benefits, military service became a career path for women that was unlike any other in the time. The work that happens in the decades after this lays the foundation for women's military service today, and really sets the stage for a lot of things to come.
Dr. Roth, thank you so much for your time and your energy. This is amazing. And I have learned so much from you about this chunk of history that I know very little about.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun too.
I can tell you're beaming.
I love getting to talk about this. It's one of those things I want people to know more about, because I think it's an important part of our history that we just, nope, didn't happen, right? But we can put it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a piece in what you were talking about where you shared that quote with this woman who says, we're not a bunch of feminists, like we're here to get jobs. And sometimes I feel like that really resonates with me sometimes, because the experiences when women are asking for progress, when they're asking for, like to be treated equally, that shouldn't necessarily have to be a political thing, right? That should just be a democratic thing and, or a capitalistic thing even, so I'm just curious, like that's such an important theme in this field. And I'm wondering, could you just expand on how that resonated with you, or why you included that quote, or what it meant to you?
Yeah. I think one of the things that got me interested in this topic altogether is that the narrative we often hear after World War II is that all the women went home. If they were in the military, they left the military, they got married, or they went back to their husbands. And yet at the same time as that story is going on, here are women like Colonel Mary Halloran who's saying, no, the military needs women and they can do good work. And here's a whole career opportunity. I mean, yes, she actually did want them to get jobs, but her bigger driving thing was to convince Congress and to point out this wasn't political. This was, like you said, it's a capitalistic society. It's a democratic society. Women can have a role to defend their countries just as men can. And the reality is that not everything in war or in the military involves carrying guns and fighting face to face. They've got people who've got to do all sorts of kinds of work. And with that in mind, she's like, no, we can do this work. We can be the patriotic people, and it's a career opportunity. So I'm really interested in this idea of women who don't consider themselves activists, because there are many who don't. And in the 1940s, feminist was kind of a dirty word, which I think is why she says that. Like, no, we're not feminists. I mean, she got Dwight D. Eisenhower on the same page as her. And that, to me, I don't think of Eisenhower as somebody who's like a radical feminist or anything like that.
He doesn't top my list.
No, he doesn't. And he's one of the ones leading the charge. And that, to me, he's standing up there saying, hey, we need women, and here's why. They're focusing on the fact that they're doing the same jobs that men were doing, absent the guns, right? But this idea that, especially as the United States embraced a new global presence, they're going to send troops to Germany to occupy. They're going to send them to Japan to occupy. Do you really need to draft tons and tons of men to do this? Because they're recognizing the physical sacrifice that men have made and the time and everything else. So Americans are kind of tired of it. They want their men back. But if women are willing to take up those roles and to take careers, that becomes important. And so it does become couched as it's patriotism. But there's this practical idea of, yes, it's going to be a career opportunity for women that is patriotic. I think similar maybe to working in the government, having a government job, and the equal pay that they give them is just, to my mind, it's groundbreaking. It's something that feminists are fighting for 25 years later in the 1970s, and we don't pay attention to this. So nobody bats an eye about equal pay. It's all right, you're in, you get it. And so you get all these women who never define themselves as feminists in the next couple of decades. As the women's movement comes up later on, that issue comes up. Are you a women's liber? They're like, no, we're not. We're just women. We're like any other woman doing their job. And yet these are women who, over the decades, they end up fighting for the things that they need. And I think it's what so many of us do, right? In our day-to-day lives, whether you think of yourself as a radical feminist or maybe not even as a feminist at all, that women have a history of pushing for the changes in their lives. So women come in and they're like, wait, I can't be a mom and be in the military. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to push back against this. Or I'm a lesbian and I can't be in the military. I'm going to push back against this. And so they create this change slowly and over time, but they never call themselves feminists. So these women who are not thinking of themselves as activists are changing things one step at a time.
I love this because in my teaching pedagogy and, my process, I really think it's important for students to see diverse perspectives on any given historic issue. And it's interesting, just the very simple thing that you pointed out, that there's this theme and belief, I guess it is a belief, that everybody just came home, and yet that can't be true. And I also love how contrary this is to this idea that everybody goes and becomes housewives, and that was the only option. That wasn't the only option. There are these women who are doing these other things. And I think it's interesting that, they're not trying to advocate for combat positions or something, but yet by being in uniform, by being in these positions, they are making that more normal, that women are just in the military, and then it can lead for other people later to break down those walls.
Yeah.
And potentially get higher pay, to stick up money. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, one of the things I think that we talked about briefly earlier in the podcast was that one of the doors this opens unexpectedly is Executive Order 9981. 6 weeks after this legislation to add women into the military, after that passes, 6 weeks later, President Truman desegregates the military. And there's been a lot of work about that. It takes a long time, though, for the desegregation in the male elements of the military in particular. So I don't want to suggest that there's this perfect change that happens overnight. But because of the Women's Armed Services Integration Act passing 6 weeks before this, and because of the executive order, almost from the get-go, the women's services admit women who are African American. They admit women who are Mexican American, Chinese American, Japanese American. So women of color have opportunities in the military that would have been unthinkable, and they're getting equal pay. And that's a part of the story that I get at a little bit in my book, and I'm eager for the next scholars to come through and also tap into that, because that I think is really powerful too, that there will be small numbers because of some institutional issues that prevent large recruitment of African American women, for example. But in 1948, women are joining the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps, and their skin color, in theory, does not matter as much as their gender. And it just rewrites the story.
That's awesome. I love that so much. Well, this sounds like an incredible book. I need to read it with much more depth. Where can people find it?
So Her Cold War, it's from the University of North Carolina Press. So if you look for UNC Press, you can find it there. It's also on Amazon or your favorite independent bookstore. If you reach out to them and just ask for Tanya Roth, Her Cold War, you can get it.
Oh my gosh, Dr. Roth, thank you so much for your time, for your energy. Mind blown.
Thank you so much, Kelsie. This has been so great.
Thanks so much for listening to Remedial Herstory, the other 50%. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts to bring more voices to the conversation. We really appreciate that effort. Until next time.